for this opportunity to be able to preach today. And I didn't get with Patrick, but that's actually the perfect song to go along with the sermon this morning. Earlier this month, we celebrated our nation's independence, and we probably did so with fireworks and barbecue, camaraderie with friends and family. And in just a few years, in 2026, we'll be celebrating this nation's 250th anniversary of that date of declaring independence. If you ever stopped and thought about the implications of that, because of what happened 250 years ago, today we're able to have citizenship in this great country. And have you ever thought about that? What does your citizenship here mean to you? Do you regard it? Do you value it highly? Do you treasure it more than anything else that you have in this world? I don't think any of our members here, to my knowledge, struggle to obtain their citizenship, but that's not the case for everyone. You know, there's certain laws and regulations that we have to follow if you know, you're trying to get your citizenship here, and it can be tedious. But I can't help but be impressed at times by what some individuals go through to try to obtain this citizenship here in the United States illegally, or try to come here and live illegally. For starters, many of the people that try to come through our southern border, they have to travel on average about 2,000 kilometers. Now that's about 1,200 miles. And if you were to leave here today, to put it in numbers we might recognize, that would be like if we left Cahaba Heights and drove over to Albuquerque, New Mexico. Now, if that was, you know, just one straight shot, that's a 17-and-a-half-hour trip. There's going to be gas breaks, restroom breaks. If you're traveling with kids, you're going to probably stop a million times. It's at least a 24 or 48-hour trip. But if that's all that stood between you and gaining citizenship here, I think we would drop what we were doing, especially with me preaching. You'd probably walk out right now and you'd go get the citizenship, right? Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but that's not the case for the people trying to gain their citizenship illegally. They can't just hop in the car and drive up to the border in a day or two. It's a perilous trip that typically takes not just weeks, but usually months. And it's a trip that comes with risk. It's one where people are jumping on train cars, they're getting on buses. This is a risk because they're shakedowns from their law enforcement. They could be thrown in prison, and walking. And not only this, but as they're making this trip, they're risking assaults, they're risking robberies, and so much more. If you're a woman and you're making this trip, this is one of the most harrowing things I think I've seen about it. But there's a 6 in 10 chance, if you're a woman making this trip to the southern border, that you are raped. I mean, that's more than every other woman being raped that's making this trip. 20,000 people a year are kidnapped as they make this trip. Now, what type of people do you think is making this journey? High society? No. If they were trying to come, they would just do so legally. These people are broke, and they're being kidnapped and held for ransom. What do you think happens to these individuals that can't pay? They let go of some of those people, but others aren't so lucky. And lastly, if you haven't, a woman who hasn't been raped or you haven't been kidnapped, then you're guaranteed to be assaulted or robbed along this trip. And so finally they make it to the Rio Grande River, and they still have to swim across. Oftentimes they may drown. And just recently I've seen they've put up a floating barbed wire fence across the middle of the river. And there's even a barbed wire structure beneath. And so if you ask these individuals what they were willing to risk to gain this citizenship, they would all say everything. And it's crazy to think about, but these people are willing to give it all to make it here for an earthly citizenship. And this isn't something that is unique to today. There have always been earthly kingdoms where people think, if I could just make it there, then I could make it easy. I would be living comfortably. I wouldn't have to struggle anymore. And in Acts chapter 22, Paul is standing before the Roman tribune, and the Jews are upset at him because he has said, I have come to preach to the Gentiles. So they're trying to get to the bottom of this. So let's take a look at verses 23 through 29. Then as they cried out and tore off their clothes and threw dust into the air, the commander ordered him to be brought into the barracks and said that he should be examined under scourging, so that he might know why they shouted so against him. And as they bound him with thongs, Paul said to the centurion who stood by, "Is it lawful for you to scourge a man who is a Roman and uncondemned?" When the centurion heard that, he went and told the commander, saying, "Take care what you do, for this man is a Roman." Then the commander came and said to him, "Tell me, are you a Roman?" He said, "Yes." The commander answered, "With a large sum I obtained this citizenship." And Paul said, "But I was born a citizen." Then immediately those who were about to examine him withdrew from him, and the commander was also afraid after he found out that he was a Roman and because he had bound him. So we see Roman citizenship was a lot like being a citizen here. It came with many benefits. Everyone wanted it. That citizenship that Paul had was a sign of great status. It was a sign of great privilege at that time. And it was against the law to bind or bound a Roman citizen, at least without being condemned. So that's one of the benefits we see there. There are many other benefits. You can look it up. There's a ton of things about being a Roman citizen that people would have wanted. And so we see here that Paul had obtained his citizenship, I may have just said that, much like one of us, that he was born a citizen. And it took the Roman commander off guard. He said, "You're a Roman?" I mean, you can imagine, there's this Jew, he's in prison, he probably thinks he's one of the dregs of society. He's like, "How did you get this citizenship? I paid a large sum of money for this." As we said, Paul said, "I was born a citizen through birth." And so we don't really know how much it cost to become or to obtain this Roman citizenship, but it's something that would have hurt the bank. It wouldn't have just been a few $100s. Oftentimes it may have also involved military service, so it may have literally cost you a limb. Maybe you lost a limb in service. Maybe you would even lose your life trying to gain citizenship to Rome by serving in the military. But it's something that would have cost a great deal. And so we see, whether it's been risking life or limb, whether it's a large sum of money, citizenship in prominent countries have always come at a great price. And let's face it, U.S. citizenship is very nice. I think we all have homes to live in, all have places to lay our head at night. We all probably have air conditioning, all have food on the table. I had a meeting with some folks at work last week. They live in California, and they don't have air conditioning. It's 70 degrees year-round where they live, which is, pretty nice, but I still don't think I could make it without air conditioning. But they have everything. We have everything we could want here. I saw some number, I can't remember the exact percentage, but even the low-income members of our society would be considered among the richest of the world. And so it's having citizenship here in the United States just comes with great blessing. We've never had to worry about our citizenship. Sorry, if you didn't know already, the sermon's about citizenship. I've said it probably 50 times already. I'm probably going to say that word 50 more times. But it's good that we've never had to worry about it, because God never has intended for his children to be consumed with earthly citizenship. And so with this first part, we've talked about earthly citizenship, but how does God want us to view citizenship here on this earth? Let's turn over to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11. And we'll read verses 8 through 10 there. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he dwelt in the land of promise as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. And so here we see the earthly patriarchs referenced. We see Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and God had made a promise to them of becoming a great nation, obtaining a great amount of land, the promised land. And so we see that they had ideas of an earthly citizenship, it would seem. But that same promise was made to all of them, and those promises went unfulfilled in their lifetimes. But they still chose to trust God and obey. And they were able to do this because they were able to look forward past their own lives. They were able to look forward past their own lives to that city that has foundations. We sing a song about that. There is a habitation. It's either the second or third verse, and it's those words exactly: a city with foundations firm as the eternal throne. You know, you think about some of the great ancient cities, they're not here anymore. In 1,000 years, if the earth's still here, New York City's not going to be here anymore. That's the way of the world. But heaven, the heavenly city, as that song says, it's from everlasting to everlasting, like God's throne. It's always going to be there. And so we see that their faith explicitly led them to believe that God's ultimate purpose for them was not earthly, but it was in fact heavenly. And let me repeat that. God's purpose for each and every one of us this morning, it's not earthly. It's not with anything bound on this earth, but it is eternal. And so let's keep that eternal heavenly perspective in mind as we read verses 13 through 16. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. And truly, if they had called to mind the country from which they had come out, they would have had opportunity to return. But now they desire a better, that is, a heavenly country. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. And so as verse 13 indicates, these people were strangers and exiles on this earth. That is how they were living. And that's not what this life is about, finding a place for ourselves here. You know, if we look through our songbook, what are we going to find? Songs like Patrick led. This world is not our home. We're not going to find songs, you know, talking about how great it is here. We're going to find songs about how great heaven is. And that point is emphasized in verse 15. If Abraham was merely looking for an earthly home, he could have just turned around and went back to Mesopotamia. But he didn't do that, did he? And the fact that he didn't do that proves to us that God's plans for us are ultimately eternal. And this is again repeated in Hebrews 13:14, where it says, "For here we have no lasting city, but we seek the city that is to come." So how can we live like exiles today? How can we live like sojourners on this earth today here in 2023? How can we live like people looking for that city that is to come? Let's turn over to Philippians chapter 3. Philippians chapter 3. And we will read verses 17 through 19 there. "Brethren, join in following my example, and note those who so walk as you have us for a pattern. For many walk, of whom I have told you often, and now tell you, even weeping, that they are the enemies of the cross of Christ, whose end is destruction, whose God is their belly, and whose glory is in their shame, who set their mind on earthly things." So what is the goal of the Christian? You know, that's a pretty general question. I think it could have a million different answers. Is it to gain fame, fortune, money, and a life of comfort and ease? No, absolutely not. To me, to sum it up, I would say it is to become more like Christ and to help others become more like Christ. Paul repeats that a couple of times throughout Scripture. He says, "Imitate me as I imitate Christ," a couple of times in Corinthians alone. And so we see Paul had many different characteristics in terms of his Hebrew citizenship that would have made him a very impressive citizen, starting in verse 4 of this chapter. "Though I also might have confidence in the flesh, if anyone else thinks he may have confidence in the flesh, I more so, circumcised the 8th day of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, concerning the law, a Pharisee, concerning zeal, persecuting the church, concerning the righteousness which is in the law, blameless. But what things were gain to me, these I have counted loss for Christ. And so, to put that in standards for us, it would be like saying, hey, one of my ancestors signed the Declaration of Independence. They fought in the Revolutionary War. Each of my ancestors fought in each war that we've had. Maybe you say, hey, I went to Harvard, graduated there with a law degree or something. Whatever would make you a prominent member of this society. Paul had more than that. He could have been living a comfortable life in Jewish society. He said he was a Hebrew of Hebrews. He even had that near priceless Roman citizenship. And yet, what does he say in verse 8 about this, about what he thought of his accomplishments? Verse 8 says, I have suffered the loss that I may gain Christ, and I count them as rubbish. He counted those things as garbage. If these things in our life aren't helping us get closer to Jesus, but in fact taking us farther from him, you need to throw them out. Simply put, they're garbage. These are Paul's words, and these are things that he lived by. And it really broke Paul's heart, because as he looked at these Philippians, there were so many of them that were still caught up with earthly citizenship. And it broke his heart to see these reject Jesus and choose this world as their home. And that gets us to our main verse of the lesson in Philippians 3, verse 20. This is really in contrast to the things that he said in 18 and 19, where he's describing those people who have chosen this earth as their home. He says there, but our citizenship, it's not on this earth. Our citizenship is in heaven. From it we await a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. So instead of focusing on earthly things, we as believers have to have a different perspective. We have to have a heavenly, eternal perspective, one that's full of faith, that looks forward past this own life. Paul notes once again here, as we just read, that this place is not our homeland. Heaven is our homeland. And instead of the pleasures and cares of this earth, we have to focus on Christ, on his return, and pleasing him. Last week, Greg had an awesome sermon on Job, coincidentally, on the first two chapters and his suffering and dealing with that. My father-in-law has an example that he'll give from time to time on the book of Job and his suffering. But imagine God approaching Job and saying, Job, would you like to team up with me to achieve a great victory over Satan? Imagine if God came to you and said that thing. I would be thrilled. I would be pumped up. I'd be like, I can't believe you're choosing me to do this. Show me where to sign up. But we know the story. Imagine what God would have told him next. It's going to cost you everything. It's going to cost you your wealth. It's going to cost you your children's lives. It's going to cost you almost your own life. I may step back and say, wait, hold up now. I didn't know all of that going into this. But in the same way, God asks us today, do you want to be a kingdom citizen? And I think we all exuberantly say yes, as many of us here this morning that have been baptized or even here, we show that we want to be part of God's kingdom. But in the same way that he told Job it will cost you everything, being a citizen in God's kingdom will cost you everything as well. And it may be that you're listening to this sermon and thinking, well, I haven't had to live a life of much sacrifice. It's not been very difficult living here in the United States, being a Christian. That's certainly true for me. And perhaps that makes me guilty of trying to have dual citizenship. I'm trying to have citizenship here on this earth and also in heaven. And if you live a life like this and you get to heaven, you think God's going to, when you stand before his throne, you think he's going to be, wow, I am so impressed. You toted the line. You straddled it really well. That's tricky to do. Well done. Enter in. Unfortunately, if we live like that, where we're not making these sacrifices, we're not going to hear, well done, good and faithful. I have one more point this morning, and the lesson will be yours. But we've talked about many different things. We talked about the benefits of these earthly citizenships, what are some of the benefits of heavenly citizenship? We could be here all day just talking about these, but just a few that I find very important. But here, while we're on this earth, one of the biggest things is I'm a very anxious individual. Suffer from anxiety from time to time. I know some members here suffer from that as well. Everyone does from time to time, but stress can get me down. But we always are able to approach God's throne of grace. Sometimes the only answer that we can have in this life is approaching God in prayer and asking Him to help you out. That's such a blessing that only a kingdom citizen has. People in the world don't have that same benefit that we do. We have, being a kingdom citizen, such a great support group, and it's so much more than a support group, the church. I mean, how many people in the world have hundreds or thousands of friends, bodies of believers that are concerned for you? You know, all of us in here may not be the closest of friends, but I know if one of you is hurting, then somebody else is hurting for you. And that's so nice to think about. If someone has financial hardship, members here will gather together to answer the call. If it's something as simple as someone saying, hey, I need help moving, can you help me out with this? I've seen time and time again members banding together to help that person move. These are benefits of being a kingdom citizen. I mean, there are so many more, but these are just a couple while being on this earth. Another benefit is as we face death. We don't have to face death in fear. I read an article one time of prominent atheists, their last words. And as they approach death, they're not so confident and cocky as they were in life. They're usually, many of those that I read about were appealing to a higher being. If there was one, they would say, please have mercy on me now. It can be a terrifying prospect still even for us because we don't know exactly what death feels like. But we can take comfort in the fact that as we approach that river, God watches and He's with us as we transition from this life to the next. We're never alone in that process. And I take confidence in that. Lastly, in heaven, and most ultimately, we will always be with God. There's no greater blessing than that. Additionally, some added benefits that there will be if our loved ones will make it, we'll be reunited with them. My mother's been gone 8 years, and I'm confident that she's there, and it's going to be a wonderful thing seeing her again. That's something I have to look forward to. There will be no more pain, no more sorrow, no more tears. If you have, anxiety like I mentioned at the beginning, you're never going to have to worry again. It's amazing. There are so many benefits of being a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. And so this morning, if you're not a kingdom citizen, we can help you in that. We can help you get your citizenship where you need it to be, or if you just need to make your life in some other way. Whatever need you might have.